With fall camp closing down, one thing's certain. Washington's got a lot of weapons.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button. Click the little bell down below as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the program out a lot. Now, Lars, we've got a whole lot that we wanted to get to because Washington's fall camp is now officially closed to the media. So we wanted to spend some time talking about some pretty broad takeaways at the very end of the show. You know, things like Washington's size being much improved, the special teams unit, different things like that. We want to make sure we dive into all of that, but we also want to make sure we spent a whole bunch of time talking about winners from fall camp on both sides of the ball, because one thing that we came into fall camp with was questions about, you know, we knew what the top end of the roster was going to look like in terms of the stars like Jonah Coleman and Denzel Boston, but we wanted to see who would emerge as the depth on this team. And that became very clear, especially at wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. I talked to a friend of the show after the mock game, and I said, DeMond's got to have a hard time getting through TSA because of all the weapons he carries. He's got so many guys outside, and you could go at all three positions: running back, tight end, wide receiver. All three of them have depth and quality, and I think we saw that certainly in the mock game, where even if it was Kai Horton, you could just see Audric Harris making plays. Justice Williams had a really nice snag, over the last couple. Actually, he had several.
Vinesbright had a nice day too.
And Brayton had a really good one. Rashid, I think, had the touchdown. There was a couple, that just
the touchdowns during like the red zone period. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, worth noting for just real quick for the people that didn't go to the mock game, it was a scrimmage mock game simulation walkthrough. Like there was, as we were talking about before the show, whatever the result of the play was, they still ran the next one. Sometimes the ball moved, it didn't. But those do still matter because you're still making those plays. And I think you're getting the banked reps ultimately. And we're probably not going to see as much of the depth this season just because of the way the offense runs, barring injury. But it's truly, you can see that future is there. And also this season, DeMond's got plenty of talent around him.
One thing that I think is also worth mentioning, because you did a great job describing it, is it does make our job a little bit difficult at different points. It's very hard to keep stats with some of these things where, sometimes it'll be announced one way by the PA and, it'll look a little different on the field. And then, oh, hey, was that 25 or 27 yards? And then all of a sudden they've only moved the ball 6 yards. So there are a lot of different things that go into it that make it a little bit confusing. I'm glad you did, just an overall summation of the group. One name that you didn't mention, who honestly might be the biggest winner of fall camp, is Dezmen Roebuck. It was nice to see him back after he missed a day with what, looked to be an illness that's been going around the team that kept a few players from talking to us in the media over the course of the final week or so. Nothing to be concerned about there, but he's someone who just every single day, he showed up as a crisp route runner with great ball tracking ability, reliable hands, and someone who was getting open at all three levels of the field. And despite being, 5'10", 5'11", I think is what he's listed at, he was making contested catches too. He's someone who's just so good at high pointing the football. I couldn't have been more impressed every single time he stepped on the field. And I look at guys like him. You mentioned Justice Williams, who's another name I have written down as just one of my biggest winners of fall camp as a whole. I think those are two guys who we might not see a lot of this year because Rylon Dillard-Allen has been really solid. You mentioned Audric Harris, Kevin Green Jr., along with Rashid Williams and Omari Evans, plus Denzel Boston. There are so many talented pass catchers for DeMond Williams to throw to. Now that fall camp is closed to the media, the question is, over these next 2 weeks, who is really going to separate themselves and who are we going to see make that start on August 30th? And I feel like it's the same question at left guard, where you and I talked about on our Monday show. We feel like, just from reading the tea leaves of what Jedd Fisch said, John Mills might have the upper hand here, but I wrote down on my just list of winners, both John Mills and Paki Finau as guys who were big winners in fall camp, because you and I said it yesterday, or excuse me, on our Monday show. We really like the talent that both these guys bring to the field. The Problem is there are only 5 offensive linemen, and having a veteran in Garen Hatchett is really nice because it adds some stability to the group. And with both of these talented young players, you want to find a way to make sure that you get all of them on the field as much as possible.
And in a way, you remember last season how they would use offensive linemen as that 6th, 7th guy instead of, because you didn't really have the depth there. I look at it and think maybe that's how John Mills or Paki working here. Now, I think, Paki having a little bit, 1 year, at least actually 2 years on him, right? I think now that I think about it. But John Mills absolutely, caught up to him in fall camp. I'm just kind of curious, like Paki, we know how much Paki's grown both physically and from his football IQ and just kind of strength and things like that. To me, I wonder, I think they're going to play 13 games. I just don't know like how that's starting. I'm just curious how it's going to end up. The breakdown is going to be, because I agree with you that kind of Jedd basically kind of came out almost and said John Mills will probably get his first start in the opener. But then it's like, well, what about the UC Davis game, the Wazoo game, and then certainly the Ohio State game? Like that's kind of a true test. And I think for me, you have to have an answer, but I think you're confident that whichever one ends up being the better one throughout 13 games, you're more than trustworthy with it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something where I look at the interior of the offensive line, and I think you have more than enough bodies there. I think they're still waiting for that third guy to emerge at tackle. Right now, it does feel like it would wind up being Maxus McCree if something goes wrong at either tackle spot. But I think John Mills is someone who's going to be in that discussion long-term as well, which just kind of, again, lends to the overall depth of the room and how much different it is than at any point last season, truly. And as I just look at what this team can be in 2025, you have them at 10-2. I have them at 9-3. I think it's something where just I look at this offensive line, and this is going to be the group that is going to be the biggest catalyst in all of this, because we expect it to take a step forward. It's hard to get worse than what it was last season. It doesn't need to be a top 5, top 7 group to say, okay, now Washington's offense can take a big step forward. If it is middle of the road, somewhere between 8 and 12, I think you're more than happy with that, because that shows a significant improvement, and B, it shows that you still have plenty of building blocks going into 2026 when, as of right now, 3 of the 5 guys that are projected to start are going to have remaining eligibility. And I think that's something that Jedd Fisch looks at as he continues to build the foundation of this program. That's where he wants to build it. And you and I have talked about the recruiting ad nauseum and what it looks like with getting Cody Green in the building. Plus, maybe you want to go out and take one more offensive line transfer for next season. There's so many different ways that it can unfold. But at left guard, we look at these 2 guys and it's okay. This is what these 2 guys are both going to be faces of this offensive line for years to come, is just really the way it looks with the way this competition is played out. So I think that's something to be excited about. And I was trying to find the best way to just kind of shift gears here, because one guy who I really do think shifted gears in terms of his approach to running the football this fall camp has been Adam Mohammed. His patience, his burst, just his aggressiveness have been so impressive to watch. Something where last year you saw him run with a little bit of confidence early on, and as the offensive line started to break down, I feel like we didn't see the same level of just aggressiveness of just, okay, I take the ball, I know this is the gap that I have to hit. There was no indecision from him throughout fall camp, and that was something that really excited me as I look at what this rushing attack can be with not just Jonah Coleman and Jordan Washington alongside him in the running back room, but with Damon Williams as well. I just think that this is a guy who can take 70, 80, 85 carries, something in that ballpark this season, and be really effective.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we've been kind of talking about, where I remember we talked about, showing the Arizona numbers in the breakdown when, Marcus Wiley and Jonah, when Jonah took that next step as a sophomore, you could see the progression, but you're still going to only get so many increased carries with having such a dominant senior. But I just looked at Adam this entire fall and I'm like, man, and again, we love Jonah. Don't get me wrong. I said about Jonah, but if Jonah wasn't, if he decided to go to the draft, I think you are still almost just as confident in Adam's ability to kind of mirror what Jonah could be for all the reasons you said. I mean, he physically looks the part. Absolutely. He did that even so last year, but he's just, gotten more refined this fall. But that vision, kind of just the understanding and feel for the game, that is what has increased. And by the way, it's no surprise because look at Scotty Graham, it's his running back coach. Like, Scotty's the one that's going to get it done with that room.
Absolutely. Scotty's been really confident in his approach. Also, you said Marcus Wiley. I think you meant Michael Wiley.
Oh, yeah.
Him and DJ Williams. That was a really nice combination of guys at Arizona for Jonah to learn from, and he's shouted them out several times. But Lars, let's move over to the defensive side because this coaching staff is very confident in this defense. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Prize Picks. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The daily fantasy platform lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. Preseason is already heating up, and college football isn't far behind. Whether you've got your eye on big-name quarterbacks or breakout running backs, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in on the game. Prize Picks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you get your picks right, you could cash in and win up to 2,000 times your money. The flex play option is a total game changer. Even when one of your picks misses, you still doubled your money. Prize Picks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 play. Prize Picks, run your game. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Drip Drop. If you're trying to stay on top of your routine, whether that's workouts, long days on campus, or trying to stay focused through back-to-back classes, hydration is where it all starts. And that's where Drip Drop comes in. Drip Drop is doctor-developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration. It uses the perfect balance of sodium electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of a leading sports drink. My go-to flavor has been fruit punch recently. It's a game changer after a workout, or for me, when I'm playing basketball for 90 minutes, a couple times a week, I really do get drained and dehydrated pretty quickly, and Drip Drop comes in clutch for me. Right now, Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKDOWNCollege. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKDOWNCollege for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard. Lars, on the defensive side, I feel like the overall winner is very, very clear. And that's safety Alex McLaughlin.
Yeah, that's one. I mean, you're going out on a limb there, I think. It's kind of a stretch there with saying that. No, absolutely. I think, and almost in a way, like the reach that he has, that range that he can show, that he showed this fall. And he wasn't the only safety today, because I want to talk about RDA in a minute. But I think it's fair to say that Alex was that guy where coming in, we thought it would be CJ Christian, as a senior that would get the bulk of the carry, bulk of the reps. And Alex kind of just took it over. He just asserted himself more so than anything. I don't think it was anything CJ didn't do. It was just what Alex did do. And I think looking at him in that mock game, certainly, but even just the totality of both spring and certainly fall camp, because he made a jump from spring to fall camp. I think spring he was kind of running a little bit more with the twos, and you could just see like, hey, he's going to be that guy in 26. Possibly he'll get in that, he'll get some reps in 25 for sure. But, maybe more so for 26. And now it's like, he's obviously the guy in 26, but like he might be the guy in 25 as well for all the reasons we've been talking about. He's got the ability to do, come down to the box, be able to still be up, drop back deep, make the play, and cover tight end over the middle, which I think that size is kind of so imperative, where if you have a small guy in the slot, he's obviously got the advantage. But if you got like a 6'6" tight end, Alex can hang right there.
Absolutely. I think that's a big part of it, because this is something where I feel very vindicated about all this. As all our everydayers know full well, I have been on the Alex McLaughlin hype train since day one. And it was something where when we got a chance to talk to Taylor Mays a little bit about him a few weeks ago, the size was so important for him, and it's allowed him to do a little bit more. And maybe that is why we saw a little bit more of CJ Christian in the spring. And now that, their sizes are somewhat equal in terms of weight, Alex has that advantage, because you turn on the tape and you just see an absolute playmaker. He just flies to the ball, is so good in the run game. He's done a lot of playing that down box safety role over the course of fall camp, and just looks really good as pretty much an additional linebacker. As you talked about, he can shift out in the slot and play a man coverage against tight ends if you need him to play over the top. He's got the range. He's got the ball skills. He's got 16 PBUs and 6 interceptions in his career. So he's someone who has found ways to make plays in every area of the game. And it's something, when you look at this Ryan Walters defense as a whole, it is so predicated on safeties that can tackle and safeties that can do a little bit of everything, especially when you go back to his last 2 years at Purdue and what he asked of Dylan Tiedemann. So that's something where I think we're going to see Alex just take a step in that direction this season. I'm really curious to see what that's going to look like. I got a couple of bold predictions that I'll throw out on a future show about where I think that might be going. But one other guy who I wanted to shout out as we stay in this, theme of defensive backs is Leroy Bryant, because I know you got a couple of guys you want to get to. Also, Leroy is somebody who we fully expected Rashawn Clark to start in the nickel, and it just seems like Leroy has just made a massive jump from spring to now. We were really impressed with what he was doing on the outside in spring camp, but when we got a chance to talk to him last week, he's shifted a lot more of his focus to the nickel, where technique is a little bit different. And he said, it took me a little while to get that all figured out. But once I did, it was something where we got to see just everything that helped him shine on the outside, his aggressiveness in man coverage, and everything that we look for from Ryan Walters. And Ryan Walters nickelback, I should say. And I don't know if we're going to see him just take that position over Foley this fall. I feel like Rashawn Clark is certainly going to get some reps there as well. But it was really nice where we know how much of the back end of this defense does revolve around what the nickel is doing. And having a veteran guy who Leroy's a third-year sophomore who you can really rely on in that position is going to be so, so important.
I think, can you remember the last time Washington had this amount of size in terms of just sheer wingspan and length at all 5 positions?
This is a really big defense, yeah.
And I think that's partly why, and that's, again, no slight to Rashawn Clark, because absolutely he's going to play this season, but just watching him and comparing him to Leroy's got that, obviously the experience, like you mentioned, but I think that size is what's going to play most. And, when you talk about being able to cover all different types of guys, he's got the physicality to do it in the run game as well. And that, to me, is something where when you package all of that together, it would be no negative to Rashawn Clark if Leroy does end up actually kind of just playing it out as the nickel starter of the season, because Rashawn can still get snaps, but you're looking at it more saying, hey, let's just kind of mold him for next season, because, Leroy then can kick outside, and then you have Rashawn in the nickel, and both of them have played the season.
No, absolutely. Where I just wanted to make sure you had the floor there, because there were a couple other defensive backs that you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, and the other two that are worth mentioning were obviously RDA, having the pick 6. So I think it was a 36, 38 yarder in the spring game off Kai Horton, I believe. And Dylan Robinson, another guy that just, when we're talking about next season, again, we're not going to see Dylan as much this season because of Takario Davis and Ephesians Priceock, but a guy that absolutely, when Takario made some interceptions, as far as I looked, I'm like, wait, was that Dylan or was that Takario? I really truly can't tell. And I think those are guys that you look at building. We talk about building blocks on the offense, with the offensive lineman, Adam Mohammed, those guys like that. Those two guys are absolutely faces of the defense moving forward.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. The biggest thing for me, because we got a whole bunch of questions about Dylan, where he was the highest rated enrollee to come in this fall. So people were very curious about his progress. And you and I talked about it, where he did get burned a little bit early on. But one of the things that I know Matt Doherty talked about back on signing day with him is his understanding of wide receiver. John Richardson talked about it as well, where now that he's playing defensive back full time, there is a pretty significant learning curve to shifting over to the other side of the ball. And that was something that I think we saw day in and day out, was he just continued to learn and continue to improve. And he really just kind of bucked that curve to a certain extent, where after, the first week and a half of, oh yeah, he's getting picked on here, he's getting picked on there. All of a sudden, those things sort of went away, and we saw that kind of culminate in the mock game when he had that really nice play to just moving back while playing just a shallow zone to pick off DeMond Williams. So I look at everything he brings to the table, and I couldn't be more excited about the long-term future of the secondary too, because I feel like, to your point, people are going to look at it and say 4 of the guys who coming into fall camp, when I'm including CJ Christian, 4 of the 5 projected starters that we had coming into fall camp are all set to graduate following the season. So it's, there's going to be so much turnover, and what's this group going to look like next year? No, all of a sudden that's not the case. There are so many different guys that you can build around in the coming years. And that's something that I think all Husky fans should be really excited about. Another guy who I think they should be really excited about is someone who we've mentioned in bits and pieces, because he's made, I think this is the best way to describe it too, because he's made splash plays when he's in there. It just isn't always, on a regular basis, is Bryce Butler. He's just someone who I look at defensive tackle as someone who's been really good at shooting gaps and just finding ways to blow plays up, whether it be in the run game, as a pass rusher. He's done a good job of consistently making his way into the backfield whenever he's out there. And I think he came away as a big winner of fall camp, and someone who I don't know what his role is going to look like in the depth chart, to be completely honest with you. If he doesn't make the depth chart, I'm not going to be shocked with the pairing of Armand Parker, Elenius Davis, and whether it be Simone Peppa or Logan Sagapolo as the second string nose tackle. If Bryce Butler is the odd man out in that regard, I won't be shocked. But he's someone who I think is going to find a way into the rotation this year and is going to make an impact.
Yeah, I mean, the depth chart is kind of skewed, in so many respects anyway. So I agree with you in that respect where maybe he might not be, but I think he will be, honestly. I think if they're being true to themselves, they would list kind of all those guys at either or options and just kind of just say, this is their depth, and you can go, honestly, week by week or let's be real. They're not going to update the depth chart anyways. But another guy kind of in that same mold where, he really asserted himself as well was Dezmen Bryant at linebacker.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure. You said Alex was like the kind of MVP of fall camp, if you will. I think Dezmen Bryant might have a little bit of like honorable mention worthy is
absolutely, yeah.
somebody else. And I think to me, when you look at the linebacker position, you have so much veteran talent, Jacob Manu, Tarek Buda-Alukta, and Extra Alexander. But Devin's basically been right there as that fourth guy. And when you have this 5-1-5 theory defense, you're kind of running out and saying, well, how is he going to fit in? But again, like we've been talking about with a lot of these guys, they're just going to find a way because they've been making way too many plays consistently throughout spring and fall camp.
Absolutely. And that just kind of speaks to the overall takeaway that you and I have had from fall camp, which is that the depth of this team is so much better than it was at any point last season, taking into account everything that happened. But Lars, that just brings us to one more thing that we want to talk about. We just wanted to make sure we hit on all of the important takeaways we had from fall camp. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at OpenPhone. If you're running a business, every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you needed a service. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need OpenPhone, so you never miss an opportunity to connect with your customers. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system designed to streamline and scale your customer communications. Do you juggle 2 phones just to keep business and personal calls separate? OpenPhone can solve that instantly. Your whole team can share one number and respond to customers like a shared inbox. No more, who's handling this? See why over 60,000 businesses trust OpenPhone. They're offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnCollege. That's OPENPHONE.com/LockedOnCollege. They'll even port over your existing numbers for free. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Lars, people have been asking us for some general takeaways as well, where we try to get into the specifics of certain players with different things we've seen on a day-to-day basis. One thing that I don't think you and I haven't had an opportunity to talk about is, I think, what might wind up being the most important part of just playing in the Big Ten. And that's the size and physicality of this team, where I remember walking out there for the first couple of days even after spring practice and saying, oh, this team looks very, very different. And a lot of that is having a full offensive line, having a full defensive line. But the size from last year compared to this year, and Jedd Fisch ran through some of the numbers where they gained over 700 pounds as a team, or up like 1.5 miles an hour in whole in terms of like top sprint speeds and different things like that. It's a bigger, faster, more athletic team. And that's something where that certainly got exposed at different points last year. And I'm really excited to see what that's going to look like just against other teams now.
Yeah, and in all 3 phases, because you refined everything, you know what to do now. And that's, I think, kind of what we expected Jedd to do, where we knew year 1 was going to be a little rough. We didn't think it was going to be as rough as it was, but it was understandably rough. With all that being said, there's no excuse going into the season. You had the resources and you used them. Now you have to put that into action. And I think we've seen that in fall camp, but it still matters, when the lights are actually on against another team. That's kind of where it all has to come together. But I think, when you look at from, let's say, the defensive line, just take, for example, you have all that depth. You have bodies, not just in terms of numbers, but like guys that you can trust on a week in, week out basis, whether it's Armand Parker, Elenius Davis, Bryce Butler, like we were talking about, even Logan Sagapolu, a guy that is on the, Poly College Football Player of the Year watch list, a guy, he converted from offensive line to defensive line last season. So now he's in another year where we talked about him last season, like MJ Allen, where that first season, okay, you saw the idea, but he was like your 7th offensive lineman. Now he's probably your 3rd, 4th, 5th, or defensive lineman going into the season. And I think for me, with that pairing with Simone Peppa and Ontario Thompson, like all these bodies that they did not have last season, both just in terms of they were on all the rosters. But even if you look at the roster last season, UW just got decimated in pretty much every category.
Absolutely. And of course, so much of that did come down to just, bad luck, the circumstances of everything that happened, which are out of Jedd Fisch and that coaching staff's control. And we just look at this. That's one of the reasons I think you and I are so optimistic about this season. And I'm glad you mentioned Logan Sagapolu, because I think that he's just kind of the perfect example of what this team can look like, where he comes over as a very raw was an offensive lineman, comes in to play nose tackle and everything. And there were certainly a couple of plays last season where it was, oh, okay, yeah, I certainly see the plan here with this guy who is just the definition of a 2-gap run stopper. And he's slimmed down. He's changed his body this offseason. And the coaching staff is very, very happy with the progress he's made. And I think it's something where you and I don't even get to see a full, glimpse of what that looks like during fall camp because there are so few contact periods. There are so few periods where Jonah Coleman is, trying to pick up a yard on 3rd and goal and Logan Sagapolo is the guy he has to go up against. We're not going to see very many different plays like that. But he's just someone where you listen to everything the coaches are saying about him and you just watch him on the field when he's out there because he's been dealing with an injury. Doesn't sound like it's going to be anything too major that's going to carry over into the season. But you just look at the improvements that he's made, the changes that he's made to his body and everything else. And it's okay. This guy looks ready to take a step forward. And on top of that, as you and I have been saying, the coaching staff has also brought in adequate reinforcements around him. So it's not, we're leaving everything to this guy. We're leaving everything to that guy. And he needs to be a hero and go out there and make a play. No, you have Ontario Thompson, a guy who's shown that he can make plays in this 5-down front where he's going to win these one-on-one matchups. Taitai Uyunglele can do that as well. Samode Pepa is someone who can spell him at nose tackle. Javon Parker, we'll see whenever he gets back onto the field because he's kind of just the X factor in all of this. But if Logan can just take a step forward and be a serviceable run stopper, you're really happy with that because with everybody else in the room, if they can just excel at the 1 or 2 things that they are being asked to do on any given play, a very, to throw it back to the last defensive coordinator, a very Steve Belichick, do your job kind of defensive line, there's no doubt in my mind that this group is going to take a step forward because it doesn't need to go from 15th in the Big Ten in sacks to 3rd or 4th. If they do, hey, who's not going to be happy about that, right? But if it goes from 15th to 9th, there was clear improvement there. Is it enough? No, but is it a building block that these coaches can then take to kids on the recruiting trail in the 2027 class? Like Troy Bowens is a name that I think this coaching staff is really, really interested in and say, look at what we were able to do with this group of guys. Let's get some more of this, high-end 4-star, 5-star talent, whatever it might be, into the room and continue working with those guys. I think they're more than happy with that.
And partially that's because you have the secondary to hold up as well, which you had somewhat last season. You had Prysock, but he didn't have Dikario opposite him. So I think that kind of hindered his abilities a little bit. And then you look at safety, obviously, with Alex, McKell's back, but CJ, Alex, RDA, all those guys that are making plays in fall camp, it's a matter of everything meshing together. And I think that's why the linebacker position is kind of such an enigma. But you look at X-Ray Alexander, a guy that, okay, well, how was he going to fit into this? Well, look where he's been at. He's lining up a little more outside. And so you kind of factor all those things in to say, no matter – and it really truly does ring true because every now, we know coach speak. We hear it where it's like, hey, we're really optimistic. We're really looking, like the Dickie V sort of thing, like, oh, yeah, baby. But no, it's just to me, like you look at it and say, like when Ryan Walters said that there's really no weakness on this team, and you look across the board in terms of the defense specifically, you believe it. And then you look at the offensive side, you believe it. You have the depth. If, let's say, Paki goes down, well, John Mills can at least hang. If John Mills isn't able, gets beat, well, guess what? You got Paki Finau and you got Guerin, and you got Landon fully healthy, and Senior and Carver Willis. Like every single box is checked. Now, what level is that? Where does it rank in the Big Ten? We're gonna find out starting September 27th because I'm not going to count the non-conference. Yeah, there we go. Because it really is. I mean, UC Davis, Colorado State, and Wazoo, that is a preseason schedule. Like, let's just call it what it is. But we respect it because that's what the SEC does and everybody else. But in the Big Ten, what you have to do this season. And I think that's what's so imperative about what Jedd learned last season. And I think kind of that's another part when we talk about, the growth and everything. I think there's worth noting the growth in Jedd Fisch. Like, I think we've been able to see that both in his play calling in fall camp, just the way he went about it, where he's like, we're not going to say it's the best, but we feel like we addressed all these positions. Now we're going to go find out how well these guys actually can measure up.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a big part of this is they went out there. This coaching staff did a really good job of pulling in talent in the transfer portal that can make a short-term contribution while all of these guys that we're talking about on the roster either start to show what they can do this year or just continue to develop. And then in 2026, it's full go for a lot of these guys. And I'm really excited about the way it looks as a whole, because you look at every single position on the roster and you can't help but think that position improved from where it was last season. I really can't think of a single position where this is not, if we're talking Big Ten rankings, at least 4 to 5 spots better than it was last year. Like quarterback obviously is the most obvious example, where Will Rogers was, projected as a fine middle of the road quarterback who was serviceable for the most part until the offensive line broke down. Now you have a really high end guy in Damon Williams, who, if he takes the step forward that everyone's projecting, obviously who's not going to be thrilled with that? And that just holds true across the board at every single position. Now, I know there are people who expect it to be elite at every single position. And, if it ends up being that way, that's great. And who doesn't want to have those high expectations? But I look at where everything is right now. And I think that my biggest thing that I learned from fall camp, that this is a team that across the board, you will be happy with. There will not be any significant weaknesses. Will there be room for improvement? Yes, absolutely. As there will be on any team on any given week. But I don't think that there are going to be any glaring outliers of this is horrible, that's horrible.
And if you think about it, the most one that rings true is special teams. Luke Dune, just absolutely, you got a great punter now, I think, in my opinion. And let's say Grady, if he struggles, Ethan Mitrowski proved that he can kick, he can hang. And I think that's, you have every single security blanket that is in place. And Trevor Allen can hang as a punter as well. I just said today, even on special teams at 2 positions where you really only need maybe 1 or 2 scholarship guys, you have 4 guys that can serviceably more than do a job.
No, absolutely. That's a really great point to just kind of wrap up on. One other guy who we got to speak to him with the special teams the other day, who you mentioned in our pre-show, we wanted to make sure we shouted out, is Hayden Moore. Hayden Moore is another guy in this outside linebacker group who just looks like he can be, I don't want to say overly productive, but can be someone who is serviceable at the position. He showed great burst in both the scrimmage and the mock game. And just looks like someone who, if you need a third down pass rusher to get in there, if Isaiah Ward isn't healthy or Jacob Lane is gassed and needs to take a couple of plays, Hayden Moore is the kind of guy who can come in there and just give you serviceable reps for a couple of downs. And I think this coaching staff is more than happy with his growth, along with just so many other guys in this team, which makes me really excited to get the 2025 season going. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you got any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.